Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Tunca Kali, Marketing and Training Manager of Duquesne SBDC. Today, Sara Makin is with us, founder and owner of Makin Wellness. Actually, she's one of our clients. We worked with her, I believe it was 3 years ago, when she was just starting her business, and it has grown over the years, and now she has 2 locations. So anyway, before we start, I'd like to walk you through some Zoom controls. At the bottom of your screen, you will see meeting controls. You can mute or unmute yourself or go to chat. So if you have any questions, you can type in them in chat. Also, I believe we will have a Q&A session at the end. As we are all working from home, I will mute everyone. And right now we have 21 people. Okay. Sara, would you like to start?
Yes, I would. I would first like to thank each and every single one of you for taking the time to learn a bit more about stress management and different ways that you can cope during this really stressful time. This is definitely something that's very new and something that we really can't, or we couldn't have prepared for. Especially being in business, we are actually at a much higher rate of having mental health and stress management challenges compared to other people. Actually, about 72% of entrepreneurs or people that have small businesses suffer from at least one mental illness, and that about 49% of entrepreneurs are struggling with one, and then about 1/3 of entrepreneurs struggle with 2 or more mental illnesses. So this is something that's really common in our community, and it's something that not too many people really know about. So starting out, I wanted to go over the most common kind of mental health challenges that people in business experience and talk a little bit more about how they present, so you can kind of get a better feel on if perhaps if you may be struggling with one. So depression, right now depression is at an all-time high. It's actually estimated that 16.2 million adults in the United States, or about 6.7 of American adults, have had at least one major depressive episode in any given year. So with depression, this typically occurs when someone is having a very difficult time with concentrating, remembering details, and making decisions. You may feel a significant amount of fatigue and you feel quite tired and may not feel very motivated to do a lot. Insomnia can also be a major indicator of depression. Maybe sleeping a lot, but whenever you wake up, you may not feel refreshed and you may still continue to feel tired. Overeating or having a severe loss of appetite. So sometimes when people typically when someone starts to feel more depressed, one of 2 things tends to happen with the diet. One thing that tends to happen, which in America isn't very common, it's a lack of wanting to eat anything. So regardless of, even if your spouse makes you your favorite dish, you might not really want to eat it. You might not want to eat very much. The other side of the spectrum is overeating or overindulging in comfort foods, or especially foods that have a lot of salt or fat, or having something that's very stimulating. So one of 2 things tends to happen in regards to that. Having a loss of interest in things that used to bring you a lot of pleasure. So this is called anhedonia. When things that used to make you feel good no longer make you feel good. Lack of sex drive and very low libido is also could be a big indicator of depression. Persistently feeling very sad or very anxious, or having a lot of very negative and self-deprecating thoughts. Feeling like, there's not too much hope, and just having a very difficult time thinking positively about the future. Or having suicidal thoughts or attempts, thinking about how things would be if you weren't around, and kind of ending your misery can be a big indicator of depression. if you're in business and you're feeling depressed, it is extremely difficult, especially during this time, to be able to pivot your business effectively if you are feeling very sad or very depressed or having a lot of irritability or the restlessness. So it's very important that if you're feeling depressed, that it's really important for you to get the proper treatment and the proper help that you may need in order to start to feel better. And towards the end of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about different approaches to treating depression. But typically that is what depression looks like. So another mental health disorder that's really on the increase right now is anxiety. And even before all this, anxiety disorders were actually the most common mental health disorders in the United States. And this affects about 40 million adults over the ages of 18, so 18 and up, or about 18.1% of the population every year. The interesting thing with anxiety is that the evidence-based approaches for treating anxiety actually have a very high success rate. However, only about 36.9% of people that are suffering with anxiety actually receive treatment. So the good news is that if you do struggle with anxiety or really high levels of stress, that this is something, if you get into treatment and you really start to work on yourself and to work on it, the chances of you changing and you decreasing your symptoms are quite high. So with anxiety, we always hear about people saying that they're feeling anxious or very stressed out, but there's a big difference between feeling slightly stressed out and feeling and having a full-blown anxiety disorder. So if you are feeling quite nervous, restless, or you feel like you're tense, more often than not, if you feel like you're overtaken by feelings of dread or feelings of panic or nervousness, if you actually notice that you have an increased heart rate, so if you can kind of feel your heart beating out of your chest, that can be a big symptom of an anxiety disorder as well. Sweaty palms also seem to be quite common as well, or just increased sweat. Having rapid heart rate or hyperventilating. So if you are feeling anxious and your heart rate's increasing, many times then people stop taking full breaths. When you don't give your body enough oxygen that it needs by breathing deeply, it actually stresses your body out even more. So what happens is more cortisol is released, more adrenaline is released in order to kind of get you to breathe more and to take some sort of action. But with our Western society, these outdated fight or flight responses don't really help when we're running a business or when we are at work. So originally, this type of fight or flight reaction or response was designed to help us run away from animals and things like that in the wild. So whenever you start to notice that you're getting that same fight or flight response, more often than not, that can be a big sign of anxiety as well. Having muscle twitching can be a symptom, feeling very weak or very lethargic, because this is exhausting. If you're anxious all day, and I'm not sure if, I'm not familiar with all of you on this call at this point, but most people that we've seen that struggle with anxiety are just absolutely drained by the end of the day, because they're operating on this fight or flight response and reaction all throughout the day. They have no energy by the time they get home or by the time they're done working. Because again, when you're in that fight or flight response, your body is using up all its energy that it has to keep you alive. So, by the time your battery, kind of think of it like you have a battery and you only have a certain amount of energy throughout the day. That takes up a tremendous amount of energy. So by the time you're done with the fight or flight response, or by the time you're done with feeling extremely anxious, you can feel very, very tired afterwards, and then go through that same cycle and that same loop. And actually, we've also noticed too, there seems to be a big correlation with increased stress levels and adrenal fatigue as well. So it can actually physically start to impact your body as well as your mind. So having a very difficult time with concentrating or focusing can be something that happens with anxiety as well. If you're in a state of extremely heightened anxiety, the reptilian cortex in your brain is actually the part that is activated. And that is the part of the brain that deals with survival mode. So if you are in survival mode and that cortex of your brain is activated, it actually prohibits you from accessing other parts of your brain that can do things like critical thinking and kind of seeing how your actions now affect the future and different ways of thinking. So if you are, running your business and you're constantly in survival mode, mentally, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to be able to improve your business or to even improve anything within yourself if you constantly have the reptilian cortex activated. So that's also something quite important to think about. Insomnia is, again, another very common symptom with anxiety. And as I go through these different conditions and explain these, there are some overlapping symptoms. Typically, the difference between depression and anxiety when it comes to insomnia is that people that tend to have an anxiety disorder who do struggle with insomnia tend to kind of analyze their day, think a lot about what if, and keep themselves up by thinking such worrisome thoughts. Another major symptom of anxiety that is not very known is actually having gastrointestinal problems. So if you're struggling a lot with gas or constipation or diarrhea or any type of GI issues, this can actually be a big symptom of anxiety. There are some kind of like emotion receptors in your stomach. So we've noticed many times people that have anxiety will many times have a GI problem. This is actually really common with our patients with PTSD. People that have PTSD are extremely likely, or much more likely, to have a gastrointestinal issue. And then also obsessions about certain things can also be a sign of anxiety as well. So if you notice that you get quite fixated on a certain thing, or you feel like you need to do certain things in order to relax, that can be a sign of an anxiety disorder. So there's also panic attacks, which are a whole other kind of category of stress-induced mental illness. So a panic attack is basically a very sudden onset of fear or distress. What happens is that you feel completely fine, and out of nowhere, you feel extremely anxious and you have a panic attack, and then it subsides. So these are kind of like bursts of very negative and very kind of like anxiety-driven panic attacks. And the biggest challenge with this is that you don't know when they're going to come up. So it can be extremely random, and that in of itself can make people feel even more anxious because they don't know when it's going to happen. So they're all constantly like living in fear of not knowing when the panic attack is going to occur. So like palpitations, sweating, shaking or trembling, feeling like you're choking can be a big sign of a panic attack. Many times people feel like they're actually having a heart attack when they are having a panic attack. And there's many times where people will actually go to the hospital because they think they had a heart attack or they're having a heart attack, but the actuality is that it's a panic attack. And it can be difficult too, because sometimes people will go to the hospital and the hospital says, or the ER says, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, you didn't have a heart attack, but then they don't know what actually ended up happening. And it can be very confusing and even more stressful. Having numbness or tingling sensations can also be symptoms of panic attacks. And also depersonalization. So depersonalization is whenever you start to feel detached from yourself or reality. So this happens during a panic attack and also can happen for people that have experienced a significant amount of trauma. So this tends to happen more common with people that have experienced more kind of extremely negative and extremely traumatic things. There also tends to be a fear of dying and the fear of like they're losing control. Because again, you never know when they're going to happen. So it's extremely anxiety provoking for anyone. If you have experienced this, or if you've known anyone who's experienced this, they'll tell you, and you would know that it's extremely stressful because there's no predictors of it. Other thing I wanted to go over is something that it's not very common knowledge to the public at this point, but there's a disorder that's called acute stress disorder. So about 6 to 33% of people that experience a traumatic event actually go on to develop ASD. And this is according to the Department of Veteran Affairs. And the reason why I'm sharing about this one is because this is trauma-induced. So this is a trauma-induced kind of reaction. This whole virus situation is extremely traumatic on a macro level. And the definition of trauma is quite subjective, meaning if you perceive something to be traumatic or very upsetting, then it is a trauma, it is valid. It's really not in my place or any clinician's place to judge whether or not what you've gone through is traumatic or not. If you believe it to be traumatic, it is. And we've noticed that for a lot of people, this has been extremely traumatic for them. So acute stress disorder develops before PTSD develops, because technically to have PTSD, you have to be in this state for about 3 months or longer. So what the types of things that can cause acute stress disorder are experiencing, witnessing, or being confronted with anything that leads you to have intense feelings of fear, horror, or helplessness. And what can feel more helpless, what else can make you feel even more helpless than this type of a situation where, you know, people around the world are dying, everyone's had to change their day-to-day routines, we've all had to change our businesses. It's very upsetting. So there are a lot of symptoms with acute stress disorder. And going back to the dissociative symptoms, so experiencing the dissociative symptoms, feeling very numb, having a very reduced awareness of your immediate surroundings, depersonalization, where your thoughts, your feelings don't really feel or seem real to you, and derealization, when your environment seems kind of strange or unreal to you, which a lot of people are experiencing that, because the whole idea of staying inside all the time and not being able to go to our offices or do our normal things can lead a lot of people to feel that way. And dissociative amnesia. So dissociative amnesia occurs when we experience something that's very, very upsetting, or something that we perceive to be traumatic. And it's so traumatic that our brains actually don't want to remember that. And what they do is it kind of compartmentalizes it into a different part of your brain. It makes it very difficult for you to consciously remember that event. So, so many times people have been struggling to remember certain things or certain aspects as to what's been going on in their lives, because they've felt so traumatized as a result of all these major changes that they've had to make. And the other thing I did want to mention as well, in regards to trauma, watching the news in and of itself could be perceived as a traumatic event. There's a lot of very negative content that is constantly shared. A lot of these, they're talking about a lot of these really negative stories. And for some people, we actually recommend them to really kind of avoid watching the news if they can. If you really want to stay informed and plugged in, we recommend to actually read the information rather than watching the videos, because it seems to have less of an emotional tool compared to watching videos. And you can actually get more information faster whenever you read something than whenever you watch something on the news. So back to acute stress disorder. There's also re-experiencing the traumatic event. So if you are re-experiencing, like for instance, having to let a lot of your staff go, if you're re-experiencing seeing the governor talk about all non-essential businesses have to shut down by 8 p.m. tonight or 8 p.m. tomorrow. If you're constantly re-experiencing these negative and traumatic events, that can be a sign that you have acute stress disorder. And avoidance. So an avoidance symptom is anything that you do to kind of avoid stimuli or triggers that cause you to remember the event. So if there's certain people, conversations, or places, or objects, or activities, or thoughts, or feelings that remind you of the traumatic event, and you're going out of your way to avoid all of those, that can also be a sign. And anxiety or increased arousal can also be a symptom. So what I mean by anxiety and increased arousal is basically everything that I mentioned prior with the anxiety symptoms. So the difficulty sleeping, worrying a lot, feeling very tense or on guard, like having like constantly worried, feeling very easily startled at inappropriate times. So if you are in your I guess if you're like at home and you're working and one of your children come up to you and you like jump, that can be a sign that's like an example of being easily startled. And distress is another big symptom of acute stress disorder. So can be very, if you're in a state of distress and you're feeling very uncomfortable, it's going to be very difficult for you to get what you need to get done because you're distracted by the distress. So those are the most common mental health disorders that we've seen that are on the rise for people in business and for entrepreneurs. The good news is that you're not alone. There's a tremendous amount of help and a tremendous amount of support out there. And there's a lot of things that you can do to work towards feeling better. Getting exercise can be extremely helpful. Setting up some form of exercise regimen. Whenever we exercise, our brains actually release dopamine and other chemicals that make you feel really good. And eventually those chemicals are going to continue to reinforce you to continue on with the behavior of exercising. So it would be good to, if you're able to go for a walk, go for a run. There's a lot of wonderful videos online of different exercise classes that you can take. And there's a lot of great apps that you can download as well that can be very helpful. Avoiding alcohol and recreational drugs. So many times people use alcohol as a means of coping, and especially if you struggle with depression, this is actually one of the worst things that you can do because alcohol is a depressant. Using other recreational drugs as well does not help. What may be helpful if you struggle with PTSD or anxiety and you are a Pennsylvania resident, you may qualify to get your medical marijuana card. Medical cannabis there's a lot of research showing how helpful it may be for people struggling with anxiety and with PTSD, especially when it comes to reducing the fight or flight responses, helping with sleep, and also it just basically really helps with taking the edge off. Medication may also do that as well. If you are already taking psychiatric medication and you feel like the combination you're on is not working, please talk to your prescribing physician. If you're considering starting a medication, I would highly suggest for you to reach out to a counselor first and try that method before you try the medication, and see what your counselor thinks and follow their advice. If you drink caffeine, especially if you have anxiety or PTSD, this is actually one of the worst things you can do. Every single time you drink caffeine, you actually release cortisol, which is a stress hormone that gets released every single time you feel anxious, every single time you feel triggered, and it is absolutely terrible for you. If you have a hard time or feel addicted to caffeine, there's a method that we actually employ at Makin Wellness called the harm reduction method, meaning we see what the average is of your caffeine or drug or whatever consumption, and we work with you to create a plan to help to get you off of it. This is actually one of the things that helps our clients out tremendously. Like I said, especially with PTSD, anxiety, or any increased stress levels, you don't want to put something into your body that's going to make it release even more cortisol. And trying different relaxation and stress management techniques are quite helpful as well. There's meditation that you can do. There's a lot of really wonderful guided meditation apps online and different guided meditation videos. The ones that we find to be extremely helpful are the ones from Paul Santisi, and I can include his information into the chat below. But he creates really wonderful guided meditations. Listening to binaural beats throughout the day or listening to Baroque classical music. Binaural beats and Baroque classical music actually alter your brainwave state and slow it down substantially, and you can actually focus better, you recall information better, and it actually may help with reducing your resting heart rate. So those are some really effective tools that you can implement during your workday that is going to help to relax you and to help you to stay a bit more focused. Practicing a mantra or an affirmation can be very helpful. So you want to word these in the affirmative, meaning you don't want to have as your affirmation, stop panicking, stop panicking, stop panicking. Rather, you would want it to be positive and say, it's okay to relax, it's okay to relax, I'm okay, I'm okay. Different things like that, because the way our subconscious mind works is that it can't tell the difference between a negative and if you word something in a negative, it assumes that's what you actually want it to do. So if you keep telling yourself, don't panic, your subconscious mind is gonna think panic, panic, and you're gonna feel even more panicky. So you want to use positive words. So some really great affirmations for people struggling with depression can be, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, things are gonna get better, I'm gonna get better, I think I can improve. You want to make sure that this mantra, these affirmations that you use, are something that you actually believe in. That is the challenge with most affirmations that we see online, is that they're so positive that sometimes when we say them or think them, we don't believe them. We feel like we're lying to ourselves, and then they don't work, and then we feel bad because we're lying to ourselves. So the ideal affirmation that you would want to set up for yourself is something that is as positive as you can possibly get, but you still have to believe it. So you don't want it to be so positive that you automatically feel like you're lying to yourself. So some good affirmations for people with anxiety is, it's okay for me to relax, it's okay for me to calm down, I'm okay, everything's okay, and taking a deep breath. Practicing visualization techniques are actually very, very helpful and can really help to change your emotional state in a quick period of time. So by closing your eyes and imagine yourself being more calm, being happier, perhaps visualize a time when your business was doing really well, or visualize what you want your business to be like. Visualizing having a great time at the beach or with someone that you love. Anything that's gonna instantly make you feel good. If you have children or a spouse that you really love or care about, imagine seeing them happy and you guys getting along and things going well. Our subconscious mind actually can't tell the difference between these imagined thoughts versus reality. So your physiology is actually going to start to change to respond to your visualization. So if you're extremely anxious, but then you imagine yourself, you're at this beautiful resort and you're on vacation and you don't have a care in the world, your heart rate is actually going to start to slow down. With visualization, of course, it takes time and a lot of effort and consistency to get better at it, but this is something that can be really helpful for anyone. This is actually something that a lot of professional athletes do as well. Yoga is a great stress management technique as well, and what we really love about it is that it kind of kills two birds with one stone. meaning you're getting your exercise and you're actually exercising your mind at the same time. So again, on YouTube, there's so many different yoga flows that you can do. Yoga with Adriene is really lovely. I'm sure there's other yoga apps that are out there that you can download and implement as well. Getting enough sleep is quite important. Our sleep, especially women typically need to have more sleep than men. But just a lack of sleep in of itself can lead our body to feeling quite restless. So that is very important. And sticking with a healthy diet, there's a huge connection between what you eat and how you feel. If you imagine, if you have a beautiful Ferrari or a beautiful car and you put mud into the gas tank, even though the car initially when you got it was beautiful and amazing and ran really well, you're gonna run it down very quickly and eventually it's gonna break down and stop working. So imagine your body to be in that way. What you put in your body, are you putting health and life and vibrancy into your body, or are you putting something that's gonna make you tired or sluggish or sick? So sticking with natural foods, sticking with preferably organic, fresh is best. Lots of fresh fruits, vegetables, whole grains. If you do like to eat meat, having preferably local meat that doesn't have a lot of the growth hormones and the other things added that some of the other major kind of meat companies may do at times. So that's very important. That's actually why we have a nutritionist on staff, is because she's very educated in that. And online counseling can be extremely effective. At Makin Wellness, we have an entire team of highly trained and specialized providers that we see clients and we help clients every single day that are struggling with these types of issues. All of the techniques that we implement are evidence-based practices, meaning that there's a lot of research behind them to show that they can be very effective, and we do accept all commercial plans at this time. And the other great news is we're actually able to waive a lot of the copays for a lot of the insurance companies right now. So if you have UPMC, Cigna, Aetna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, or Optum, there's a really high likelihood that your copay would be $0 at this time. We also accept Cigna, but we're not able to waive the copays for Cigna. So that is my overview. Does anyone have any questions about that, or any comments?
Any questions?
All right. So I see a question. How do you build routines to make changes? That is a really wonderful question. So really considering what you want your ideal routine to look like, and start very small. Let's say you want to make 7 different changes to your routine. It's going to be easier for you to implement 1 change per day or even 1 change per week. Typically, right in the morning is going to be the best time to make adjustments to your routine. When we wake up, our brains are actually still in that alpha brainwave state that I mentioned earlier, and we are much more open to new ideas and new kind of changes at that point. So if you wake up in the morning and you kind of stay as relaxed as you possibly can, do a lot of deep breathing, and then start to implement 1 change at a time, it's going to be extremely effective. And writing down your goals is extremely helpful. I believe the statistic is about 88% of people that write down their goals actually do end up achieving them. So writing down what your ideal routine will look like, and writing it all in the affirmative will be quite helpful for you as well, or even setting up a reminder system on your phone if you like to use your technology more, can be quite helpful. and reinforcing yourself too after you do actually start to successfully make changes. And that'll look different for everyone. So anything that makes you feel good, that can be healthy. It can be like a way of you reinforcing yourself and you rewarding yourself. You're quite welcome. Does anyone else have any other questions that they would like to ask or have any comments that they would like to share? I'm seeing we have another question coming through. So the next question that we have is, can you please address the feeling that entrepreneurs get when they feel like they have to be overproducing right now to save their business? It's a really great question. I do see that as a huge pressure right now for entrepreneurs everywhere. Like, now's the time to pivot. Now's the time to make a lot of changes. Now's the time to work really hard. And this is something that really varies case by case. So if you feel like you have to be overproducing right now and you feel like, oh, let me see the next thing, to save their business, when we pivot too much, we can get exhausted. That is very true. We can only produce and do based off of how well we take care of ourselves. If we are operating on zero, back to the Ferrari example, if you have zero gas in the Ferrari, it's not going to go anywhere. You first have to put gas in the gas tank in order for the car to move and for the car to perform. If you're starting to feel exhausted, your team is going to feel that. They're going to pick up on that. Even if you don't say anything about it, they're going to pick up on it, and it's going to also be concerning for them as well. So the best thing to do is to take a break. Take some time to rest. Take some time to rejuvenate yourself. You'll feel so much better, and then you'll be able to make the appropriate changes that you need to make, for sure. If you're feeling exhausted, you're not going to be able to produce much, and you're not going to be able to do well. And then you're also showing a negative example for your team. If they see that you're exhausted, they're going to not take care of themselves either, because they're following your lead. We can only give what it is that we have. It's kind of like before, when we were actually able to travel. Every time you go on a plane, no matter what part of the world you're in, they talk about putting on your gas mask first before you put anyone else's on. If your health is failing, if you're feeling mentally drained, if you're exhausted, you can't put the gas mask onto the business. So it's important to take care of yourself. Okay, so I got another question. Can you address entrepreneur stress and fundraising? That's a really great question. If you are noticing that you're dealing with a lot of stress in regards to fundraising specifically, again, I would highly suggest for you to take, even if it's a day or so, because most entrepreneurs and business owners I know are typically working 5 to 7 days a week. Take a day off. Do your best to relax, do your self-care, do whatever it is that you need to do to get yourself to feel good. If you are at a place where you are extremely stressed out and not feeling good, when you meet with a VC or when you meet with an investor or when you meet with another organization to raise funds for your business, they're gonna pick up on it as well. People are more intuitive than you think. And it's going to affect the way that they behave, and it's going to affect the way that they see you and they see whatever it is that you're raising funds for. They want to see people that are happy and excited and passionate and driven. And if you're feeling stressed out and anxious and depleted, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get people to invest in that. And also it's going to be more difficult for you to share the product or the service or whatever it is that you're looking to get funding for. So again, it's the taking care of yourself and seeing, are you having a lot of caffeine? Are you potentially nutritionally deficient? Are you having a lot of negative thoughts about yourself, or even are you having negative thoughts about the fundraising process? The way that we feel is a direct result of what we think. So then considering, what is it that I'm thinking around the fundraising process? Is it something like, oh, I have another phone call, oh, I know this person's going to say no again? Or is it, I'm really excited to share this product with people. I'm really excited to meet with so-and-so, and I know they're going to be really excited for it. All of those positive thoughts are going to lead to more positive feelings, which then will lead to positive behaviors. So it all begins with the thought. So taking some time to relax and to rejuvenate yourself is going to really help the thinking process as well. So we have another question too from Gail. I got on the call late, but did you discuss grieving? I discussed depression specifically, but I'm more than happy to discuss grieving. So the grief process is something that, again, I feel like that's something that we've all really gone through recently, grieving the loss of all these people that are getting sick worldwide, and, grieving the loss of the previous life we kind of had before all this stuff happened, and potentially even grieving some negative or positive changes within your business. There's something out there that I would highly recommend you to look into. It's called the 7 Stages of Grief. And that can be a really helpful resource for you to learn more about. And then also, if you are noticing that your grieving is getting to the point where you're thinking about it a lot, you're feeling really down, or whatever stage of grief you're at, I would highly recommend you to connect with one of our counselors. They'll be more than happy to help. And we have many counselors on our team that actually specialize in grief counseling. So that would be very helpful for you. So the next comment we got, staff has lost family members. This is important as well. Absolutely, because if your staff is at a stage where they're, just like Gail talked about, they're grieving, they're very upset, it's gonna not only affect their performance, but it's also a very upsetting thing. We want our teams and our staff to do well. We want their families to be healthy and happy as well. And it's very upsetting for everyone, for sure.
Any other questions?
How can we be supportive once they return to work? That's a really great question, Nicole. If you yourself or another leadership member of your team can meet with them one-on-one and not necessarily provide therapy, but some kind of coaching, meaning like, how are you doing? Is there anything we can do to assist you? Honestly, like letting them know, like, it would be really beneficial for them to see someone to be able to process and have a professional that specializes in grief counseling to help them so they can get better faster would be really effective. And basically expressing your empathy and taking the one-on-one time to meet with them would be extremely, extremely beneficial, and I'm sure they would really appreciate that. You're quite welcome. Were there any other questions or comments that you guys wanted to ask?
All right, thanks everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And as I mentioned in the chat, we will email the recording later today. And Sarah, thank you for your time. And you know, everything we do at the SBDC is free. So if you need any kind of help, just feel free to reach out to us. You can email us at duqsbdc@duq.edu or just call us 412-396-1633. And Sarah, also, can you share your contact information?
Yes, of course. So if you're ready to work more on yourself, or if you have a family member or loved one that can benefit from our services, you can just have them call us at 412-532-1249 with their insurance card, and we'll be able to get them scheduled in within about 48 hours with a highly specialized provider. And we specialize in mental health, addiction, and relationship counseling.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're
Thank
good.
you, everyone.
Okay. See you.
See you. Bye for now.